go ahead and start. Roll call.
Director Sethy,
Here.
Akbari, Gunther,
Here.
Huang, here, and Weed.
Here. We expect Dr. Akbari to be with us in about 15 minutes. Salute to the flag, please join. Salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item, we are going into another hybrid meeting. I take it, so if we can make some introductory comments.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and make some introductory remarks, just some housekeeping remarks. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this special meeting of the ACWD board. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this special board meeting either by using the Zoom application or by telephone or in person. This special board meeting will include a workshop and a discussion about the district's upcoming budget, and as well as two action items on the agenda. If you are participating via Zoom, we ask that you mute your microphones unless you're speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the district secretary. The district secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view the presentation materials as they're presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and we'll be sure to give you an opportunity at the appropriate time. If you're participating by telephone audio, you may download presentation slides from the district's website at acwd.org. Please put your phone on mute to assure the best sound quality for everyone. Zoom allows you to use your dial pad *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hand. Those participating by telephone will also be given opportunities to address the board. This virtual board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. And President Weed, that completes my remarks.
Okay, thank you. I do not see on my screen a list of participants. Is there any member of the public that is currently?
Not at this time.
All right, at this time we have public comments on matters on this notice of special meeting. Is there anyone attending who wishes to address the board? There not being so, and there no one in attendance remotely, let us then move on to close the public comments and move to the action calendar. We have two matters of business to do, which is resolution.
That's right. We have item 4.1 and 4.2, and 4.1 is resolution awarding contract for the Kirtner Road Booster Station Upgrade Project and the Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project. And to introduce that topic, I will introduce Mr. Groom Awoke, our Director of Engineering and Technology.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, Board President Weed, Vice President Sethy, and board members. This item has to do with the Kirtner Booster Station in the Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project. We presented this item to the Engineering and IT Committee on April 20th, 2022. It's a replacement of the existing facility, which is nearing its useful life. I will, with the board's will, I will read the summary and recommendation of the item. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to respond. And we have staff here to respond as well. The Kirtner Road Booster Station Upgrade Project and Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project, collectively the project include improvements to 2 booster pump stations. The work at the Kirtner Road Booster Station includes the replacement of existing mechanical, electrical, and control system equipment within the existing pump station, as well as other improvements to facilitate maintenance access, including a structural expansion of the pump station footprint and construction of an exterior equipment pad to house the new electrical and control equipment and to meet current district standards. The work at Booster Station, Washington Booster Station includes installation of a new flow meter and vault to measure the quantity of water pumped by the booster station. 2 bids to perform the work were recently received, opened, and evaluated. There is adequate funding in the capital improvement program budget for this expenditure. The project was most recently reviewed with the Engineering and Information Technology Committee on April 20th, 2022. Board authorization of these services will help meet the district's strategic goal 1.1, efficiently manage and maintain our infrastructure to ensure reliability. And staff's recommendation is by motion: 1, waive the minor irregularity in the Disney Construction Incorporated bid, and 2, adopt a resolution awarding the construction contract for the Kirtner Road Booster Station Upgrade Project and Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project to Disney Construction, Inc. in the amount of $6,428,000 for jobs number 21247 and 21197. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any comment by members of the board?
I just like to comment that I was on the committee that saw this. This project is going to be difficult. It's a very difficult area to work in. It's a very tight space. I'm not terribly surprised by the cost. It's far more than one would think of a simple just repair thing and replacement. It's very difficult. So that's all I got to add.
Thank you. Dr. Sethy?
My only comment was I was quite shocked at the bids that came in, even the one that was withdrawn. I don't know if that's due to current circumstances in the marketplace or what, but you know, we have to pay for these things. It's inevitable right now. They're aging out.
And this one is going to be very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So my comment is that this is an important project for the district. I've suggested in the past that we look at as an additional measure of evaluating projects. And that would be to how they would fit into our needs in a contingency situation. And clearly this will assist in that. But that analysis and the ability and identifying critical projects for being able to recover and operate the district with interties of the various water supply sources strikes me as something we really do need to take a look at and do it as part of our capital improvement project evaluations is one of the columns that we use to see how strong it is in supporting that. And at some point then, at least we've looked at it and we might give some additional weight to laying that out as our response.
Yeah, and if I could just mention, one of the things that we're working on right now is what we call our CIP engineering report. And in that report, it's really a compilation of a lot of different analyses. And some of what we do in that report is that what you suggest, which is we look at redundancy throughout the district, the ability to operate without a station or without a pump or without various facilities in place. What level of redundancy do we have and where are we trying to get to? And what infrastructure do we need? That gets programmed into the CIP. So we've been doing that for many years and we're updating that report right now. So in the engineering committee, I believe there's a plan to bring that work back to committee so you can take a better look at it. But it's going to be a little bit before the update's finished.
Okay. Is there a way to institutionalize that in our format so that we have a column or something that points out this is helps in contingency, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
This is the weight we would give it as a really critical project
Yeah.
from a contingency
Yes,
response.
there is. All that's in the database that backs up the CIP spreadsheet that you see. So
And
we
put
could
it in a
add
summary.
what we
Okay.
need.
So I have one additional
Please.
comment that I live within in close proximity to the Kirtner Road project. I think I'm just barely outside of the 1,500 foot.
You are outside of the 1,000 feet.
Right, but I approve of both of these projects because they're both linked in with Washington Township or Washington Boulevard, which I cannot vote on separately. I'm going to abstain from voting on both of them.
I believe my property on near Washington Boulevard and Mission is outside this
Yes, it's well outside.
boundaries, well outside, so that's fine. Thank you. All right, then do we have a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion.
4.1?
I'll second.
Director Sethy,
Abstain.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang, aye, and Weed.
Aye. Item 4.2, authorization of construction management inspection services for the Kirtner Road Booster Station Upgrade Project and Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project.
Yes, this contract goes hand in hand with the prior item, has to do with professional services related to that project or those projects. And again, I'll turn it over to Mr. Woke.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members, once again. As Director Gunther mentioned, this is a very complicated project. This item also relates to the Kirtner Roads Booster Station project. It's a complex and complicated project, requires some technical expertise that the district currently doesn't have. And as part of that, we have outsourced that service, and we've put out solicitation. And based on proposals received, we will be recommending award of a consultant services agreement to the consultant that was the most qualified. And I will read the summary and recommendation for this item, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. The Kirtner Road Booster Station Upgrade Project and Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project, collectively the project include improvements to 2 booster pump stations. Construction of the project is anticipated to begin in June 2022 with an environmental permit requirement for certain components of work. Kirtner Road Booster Station to be completed by September 30, 20. That should be 2023. Additionally, to meet seasonal water service demands, the upgraded Kirtner Road Booster Station must be completed and returned to service in advance of high demand summer months. The scope of work will consist primarily of electrical and mechanical upgrades to the facility in addition to structural and site improvements. A large component of this work will require complex knowledge and expertise in planned electrical and mechanical equipment installation, testing, and operation. To help ensure compliance with contract and regulatory permit requirements, as well as district operational needs, construction management and construction inspection services are required. There is adequate funding in the capital improvement program for this expenditure. The scope and need for construction management and inspection services were reviewed with the Engineering and Technology Committee on April 20th, 2022. Board of this contract will help meet the district strategic plan goal 1.1, efficiently manage and maintain our infrastructure to ensure reliability. So staff's recommendation is by motion, authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Kennedy Jenks Consultants, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $955,301 for construction management and inspection services for the Kirtner Road Booster Station Upgrade Project and Washington Booster Station Flow Meter Project, job numbers 21247 and 21197. Thank you.
Thank you. Please note for the record that Director Akbari joined us at 4:11 during presentation of item 4.2. We've just had a discussion on item 4.1, which this is associated with. Do we have a motion to put this on the table?
I'll make the motion.
To approve.
I'll second.
Okay, it's moved by Director Huang, seconded by Director Gunther. Do we have any comments related to the motion?
I will say it again, I approve of the project, but all the work that's being done on Alameda Reservoir upcoming and the Kirtner Road project, some people might perceive that as adding exceptional value to the neighborhood and residential property. So I'm not against these projects. I approve of them, but I'm going to abstain.
I would hope fire protection is not an exceptional value. But thank you. Is there any other comment? There being none, roll call, please.
Director Sethy,
Abstain.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
All right.
Huang, aye, and Weed.
Aye. Next, we have item 5, which is the financial workshop. And which I would note during, which may be worth noting during our next rate hearing, was not attended by anyone, either hybrid or in person. So let us move then to item 5, which is 5.1 fiscal year 2021 financial benchmarking report.
That's right. And I'll just note for the board and the folks that are here, we have Edward and Shirley DeJoe, who have joined our meeting. And for this item 5.1, be happy to turn it over to our Director of Finance, Mr. John Wonderly.
Great. Good evening, members of the board, staff, and public. This is the annual benchmark report that's prepared, and I will go ahead and run us through this presentation. The reason why it's the fiscal year 2021 benchmark report is because we look at past year actual financial results for the comparison. So we are comparing ourselves against other districts for the fiscal year that ended June 30, 2021. All right, so the reason why we go through this process every year is to see how we're doing against neighboring water providers, see how efficient we are in certain metrics, as well as aligning with strategic plan goal 3. This is a way to make sure the cost of our service is reasonable in the sense that it's aligned with the cost of other area water providers. And then also a way to be very transparent with our finances and how we compare with other agencies. And then of course, if we were to find that we were significantly out of line with other agencies, that might provide some insight on something we would want to look at further. Okay, so we're going to review quickly the metrics that we use and then run through the actual comparisons and then finish with some conclusions based on kind of what staff feels some of these metrics are telling us. And the agencies we compare against include Contra Costa Water District, Dublin San Ramon Services District, East Bay Mud, Marin Municipal Water District, the San Francisco PUC, and San Jose Water Company. So all major water providers within the Greater Bay Area. Okay. As I alluded to, data is from 2021. It's taken from each agency's audited financial statements and data that will continue to be available into the future, so we know we can consistently compare against these metrics on an ongoing basis. We do not distribute surveys. So this is again based on our analysis of our own audited financial statements compared to the results presented by other agencies. All right, and then here are the metrics that we use. We generally put them into 3 different buckets. The first one being operational efficiency, which measures things like the cost of water service or operating costs per connection or employee, those types of metrics. The next one is financial capacity, our debt coverage ratio, our funded ratio for our pension and OPEB liabilities, and our total long-term liabilities divided by our operating revenues. And then kind of the rate impact, and what's the effect the customer feels in the bill they get. So what's our typical monthly bill compared to other agencies? And then also what's our trend? How much are our rates going up compared to our neighboring agencies? Many of the benchmark metrics are pretty, I think, self-explanatory from the name of them, but there are a few that I want to explain a little further what they are before we run through the actual metric slides. So the first one is cost of water service. That's reported in dollars per 100 cubic feet, which is our typical billing unit, and 100 cubic feet is approximately 748 gallons. And this is based on the total cash payments made by an agency during the fiscal year. And the reason why we do it based on that is because some agencies receive property tax revenues, others rely significantly on development fees or other sources of revenue, and those can distort the potential overall financial cost of their water service. And so instead of looking at it from a water bill perspective, this kind of looks at it from the other perspective of the actual cost of running the utility. The next one I'd like to explain a little bit is total liabilities divided by operating revenue. So this is all long-term liabilities. That would include bonded debt issued for capital projects, as well as long-term liabilities for employee benefit programs. And over the number of years I've been doing this report, this has increasingly become the metric I look at as perhaps the most interesting to me, and I think the one that paints a really good picture of each agency's overall financial condition. So for example, About a year and a half ago, the board elected to forego a rate increase due to the financial impact many customers were facing during the pandemic. One of the reasons we were able to do that and many other water providers were not is because of our low overall debt profile, which you'll see as we get through this metric. And then last monthly bill, it's based on 800 cubic feet of consumption, which is about 200 gallons per day, and that's typical for our residential customers. It's also based on the bill as of June 30, 2021. And so because a lot of agencies implement their rate increases July 1st, it means this comparison is not necessarily based on each agency's rates as of today while we're having this discussion. Okay, so cost of water, we are a little under $7 per unit. And you can see that we're just a little bit below the median, but you can see that most of the agencies are in a pretty similar range between about $6.50 and $8 per unit. Connections per employee, we are the agency just above the median. Of course, in this case, being above the median is good, whereas on the last metric, being below was good. Reasonably efficient in terms of the size of the workforce compared to how many customers we serve. Operating revenue per employee, we're essentially right at the median here. And then operating cost per connection, just a little bit below the median. Most of the agencies, again, pretty similar in where they're at. And this is one that could potentially be distorted a little bit by if you had a few exceptionally large connections in your system. So, as a primarily residential area, that does benefit us a little bit in this comparison. Debt coverage ratio. Consistently each year we've been doing this, we've had the highest debt coverage ratio because our capital program is primarily funded through regular ongoing revenues. We do utilize debt from time to time, but it's not a major source of funding for our capital program. And then this is our long-term employee benefit liabilities for pension and other post-employment benefits. You can see that we are pretty similar to the median, just a little above. This is the one measure where we are essentially worse than the median, but we are making progress, and the board has approved and funded a pretty aggressive plan to get fully funded by June 30, 2032. And so over time, we'll see that we'll continue to decline here on this metric. All right, and then this is the one I talked about a little bit at the beginning, is becoming, one of the metrics that I really place a lot of value on. And you can see that overall, our overall debt profile is very low relative to the size of our agency. And then we are the median monthly bill. And I think because we have a low debt profile, we've been able to have lower rate increases than most agencies the last few years. And so the gap between us and the other agencies that are below us has been getting has been getting less over the last few years. And then again, another illustration, us and one other agency did not implement a rate increase in the prior fiscal year, but most agencies did, ranging between about 4% and 6%.
Mr. Wonderly?
Yeah.
Does this include the recent rate increase from East Bay Mud, which I thought was around 8%?
So this is based on an increase that occurred during the fiscal year 2021 year. And I think East Bay Mud's tradition is to implement rate increases effective July 1 of each year. And so this would be the increase they did July 1 of 2020. Okay, so we typically don't see huge changes year over year. There's a certain profile of each agency and how they operate, and things don't necessarily change substantially from one year to the next. But we do like to highlight where there are a few variances from the prior year's benchmarking report. And so in terms of cost of water, we did move back to being the median agency after being one spot less expensive in the prior year's report. And our cost per HCF increased by about 67 cents, which is a fairly big payment or increase within 1 year. But primarily that's the result of the fact that this is done on a cash flow basis. And so based on the cash outflows within that particular fiscal year, we did see a little bit of an increase. So this is one of the metrics that is maybe a bit more volatile based on the cash flow nature of it. As I mentioned earlier, we have an aggressive program to get fully funded on our pension and other employee benefit liabilities. And our ratio of those liabilities divided by payroll actually decreased from 2.67 to 2.46 last year. The median ratio increased a little bit, so we got a little closer to the median. And consistently, as you look back at this metric over the last few years, we've been slowly chipping away at this ratio. And because it's the prior fiscal year and these reports lag on these pension and other post-employment benefits, they're always a year behind. So the really good investment returns that we had during that particular fiscal year are not reflected in these ratios. Of course, with the current market situation, some of those gains are being given back within the last couple of months, but we can also take some solace in the fact that the gains are also not reflected. So, all right. Our debt coverage did drop a couple of points, but again, it's still consistently the highest ratio, still more than a full point above the second highest. We did issue $10 million of bonds within this fiscal year, so we would expect that ratio to come down just a small amount in future years, not a significant amount, but a little bit. We didn't have a rate increase, so our monthly bill stayed the same. And the difference is, as I alluded to, between our bill and the lowest of the benchmark agencies, when we looked at this last year, the difference was $6.29, and that difference has dropped now to $3.13. So we are closing the gap between some of those agencies with lower water bill amounts. And that relates, of course, to this last item, the rate increase percentage. Our rate increase was less than the median rate increase back in 1920. And again, of course, with no rate increase in 2021, we were again below the median increase. So we've consistently been below the median increase the last few years. And so what does all of this mean? Just first of all, as a reminder, and the reason why we compare against so many agencies and focus on the median is because each agency has things that make it unique. Whether that's managing their own source of supply, like an East Bay Mud, or an agency like us that purchases about 60% of its water. You have some agencies that have a wholesale component, which drives some significant differences with certain of the metrics. One of these agencies is actually a private company. So there are different regulatory requirements, different ways for them to raise money, not available to a public agency. So comparing against individual agencies, we find is not that valuable, but comparing against the median, we do think is a reasonable check to see how we're doing. We do compare pretty well in all three of those categories: operational efficiency, financial capacity, and rate impact. And we continue to compare very favorably on our overall debt profile compared to the other agencies. And that's even despite recent borrowing, we'll continue to have a very low debt profile. And that does position us with a lot of flexibility as we move forward. And that concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
And do we have questions or comments?
I actually have a question for staff. So what's the basis for including San Jose Water precisely because it's a private company. I understand we're only looking in the medium, but their operational constraint is very different. So what's the value, I guess?
Yeah, so there are some differences. There's still a lot of similarities. They're still a retail water provider. But I would say that the primary value in including them is maybe seeing how the public agencies compare against a similar sized private company. And I know that's a comment we frequently get, especially at rate time, people asking, are you regulated by the PUC and things like that? And maybe this helps folks understand how we compare against an agency that's a private company and regulated by the PUC.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gunther?
I'm good for now. Thank you.
No questions from mine. Thank you. I'm fine too.
You know, a chart I'd be interested in is, would be what are the bond ratings of each of these selection of companies we've come up with. And that would include the private sector as well, to see how they relate to the financial industry. And I would note that the one area that the private sector is multiples, as many as 5 or 6 times higher, would be in executive pay and board and director pay. One of the curious changes in the PUC. The financing elements of going to, in the investor-owned utilities, is that their incentive is to put as much capital construction as they can get approved, because their income is based on a return on their investment. And the more they can talk the PUC into allowing them to invest money, whether it makes sense or not, or is chasing environmental goals that have little to do with water provide source, results in an increased bottom line for them. So they do have a different set of standards than providing water to customers. So thank you.
I actually do have one other comment. You know, I actually would be interested, I don't know if we're using San Jose Water here.
Yes, they're one of the comparison agencies.
Okay, but we also have California Water, which is a provider to a large constituency in our nearby districts. Might be interesting to see how we compare with them as well.
Yeah, I think the reason we settled on San Jose Water is because they have one line of business that serves so many people within the city of San Jose. I think a lot of the Cal Water areas are serving smaller populations, but they might have a number of different areas within the Bay Area, but none of them that would be as large as San Jose Water or the other agencies we compare against.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. President Weed, it's 4:35 right now. I just want to announce I have another board meeting to attend on behalf of the Water District, and I need to leave at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
That's for the Southern Alameda County GIS Authority, and we're holding the meeting over at USD. So tonight's board meeting is represented by Mayor Nagy of Newark, Vice Mayor Rod Solon from Fremont, Tom Handley from USD, and myself. And we have 2 exciting ACWD presentations on the agenda. One is on how we're tracking our implementation of AMI through our GIS system. And the other is on how we're handling the transition to zone-based elections. So they're going to give an entire presentation on how we're breaking down our service area. So at this hour, it takes quite a bit of time to get to USD, which is why, and I want to be there early.
All right. Okay, fine. Let's proceed and move on to the next item.
There are members of the public who are present, so now might be a good time to just confirm, see if any comments, any members of the public would like to comment on.
Okay, we thank you for the notice. We have members of the public watching. We had public comments earlier at the beginning of the meeting for items that are on this agenda, being a special agenda. I can reopen that if there's anyone who wishes to address the board on an item which is for tonight's agenda. Do we have any hands up? There being none, then we will, if there is a concern or issue, let us know. We try to keep this as open as we can to the public. So fine, let's then move on to the next.
Yeah, we can move on to item 5.2, and I won't slow us down. We have a whole lot of material to cover. Staff's been hard at work since January and before then, preparing a proposed budget for review by the board and by the public. We do have a whole lot of material that's been posted to our website and available for this meeting. Staff's not planning to review all of that material in detail. However, certainly to the extent the board or public are interested, we're interested in sharing. So with that, I'll turn it over again to John Wonderlich.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson, and I'll go ahead and introduce this item. We'll now proceed with the budget presentation, and if I could ask the district secretary to take us to page 5 of that presentation. And so just very quickly, just a few words. You know, this budget that's been developed with staff across the district, and would really like to thank the entire team, because it really is an effort that takes many people to prepare the budget. And what's presented really reflects our commitment to customer service, to providing adequate water supply, which is as difficult as ever in the current drought conditions, maintaining our water quality. It's a budget that includes funding for current and ongoing challenges is listed here, including continued issues related to the pandemic, water supply uncertainty. You'll see significant capital investment to address aging infrastructure, as well as our commitment to responsible financial practices, such as continuing to address our post-employment liabilities. And of course, we're here this evening to explain to the board and public exactly how we're going to be spending the rate dollars that are entrusted to us. And so I just wanted to provide those few words, and unless there are any specific questions about the district overview and the goals and accomplishments that are listed, I will turn it over to Mr. Martin Curran, our senior financial analyst, or no, I think Mr. Sidney Aum. Sorry, didn't mean to get anybody worried over there, to Mr. Aum, who will walk us through some of the key assumptions that are within the budget document. He will then turn it over to Mr. Curran to present the details of the budget itself. He will then turn it over to Ms. Gunther, our CIP program manager, who will present the updated CIP. We will then turn it back to Mr. Aum to review the financial planning metrics, and then it will come back to me at the end to wrap up the presentation this evening. And so I will go ahead and walk over. You guys need a clicker.
I got one.
All right, then I don't need to walk over, and I will turn it over to Mr. Aum.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wonderlich. Good afternoon, members of the board, public and staff. I'm happy to be here in person finally. So I will get to the part of the presentation where I'll begin. Here we go. As Mr. Wonderlich mentioned, the budget is developed with everyone involved. We have a small team here, but everyone in the district's involved in the budget. I'll start by going over the budget process. So the district has a 2-year budget process, as illustrated here on this slide. The biannual budget process starts in December, and it go through a budget workshop in May, and then in June, the board adopts a 2-year budget. So here we are in May again for the mid-cycle budget review. Staff reviewed the mid-cycle budget with the finance committee in April. That was the preliminary budget. Again, this is the proposed amended budget. After this evening, hopefully, we will get to present to you the final amended budget in June for adoption. And before we start again to the next 2-year budget, we have rate setting workshops scheduled for July, August, and September. So the assumption, the budget included a lot of assumption, as you know. So one of the key assumption is the forecast demand. That's a key assumption to us, for us. So our current assumption is based on the latest trends and as well as the conservation target, as we know. So the updated estimate are lower since budget adoption. Staff assumes a drought rebound for 3 years, and the long-term demand is assumed at 34.2 MGD going forward. Staff will continue to monitor our consumption over the next few months and include any updates to demand in the rate setting process later this summer. This is just to provide a brief update on the drought condition. You notice the map on this slide is as of May 12th. As you can see, many parts of California is now in the extreme drought condition. Our imported water supply are limited. The state water projects allocation is at 5% for any new supply, but we still have access to our supply in semi-tropic, which play a crucial role in providing the demand for this year for us. We do have a lot more information on this. I don't need to go through each one of the bullet point, but for the public, want to learn more about our rebates program and our drought condition, they can go to our website. I continue on with the assumptions and plan activity. So the budget includes investments in capital projects to enhance water system reliability. It also includes various initiatives to ensure water supply reliability. And this will be discussed later in more detail in the presentation. The budget includes reorganization. Human Resources and Risk Management Division is reorganized to the new Finance and Administration Department. So Mr. Wunderlich is now the Director of Finance and Administration Department. There's a reclassification of 3 vacant positions to meet the need of the district. The board had seen that in the previous meeting. The budget includes adding 1 defined term position in our water conservation program to assist with drought related tasks. Continue on with the assumptions and plan activity. As you know, one of the core activities of the district is to ensure financial sustainability and resiliency. And we do that by proactively addressing pension and OPEB liabilities, as was discussed earlier. Within the past year, CalPERS lowered the discount rate for the pension plan from 7% to 6.8%, so that's lowered. And they lowered the discount rate for the other post-employment benefits trust fund to 6%. So these changes are a result of the updated market assumptions for future investment return. As staff, we recommend continuing to fund the pension liabilities based on a 6.5% discount rate and fund the OPEB liabilities based on a more conservative discount rate of 6% instead of 6.5%. As a result of strong investment returns, as we know, in fiscal year 2021, in both the pension and the OPEB plans, the district could make lower contribution now towards the plan and still achieve full funding by June 2032. Staff reviewed the funding approaches with the Finance Committee in April, and there's interest in maintaining the aggressive approach to funding both pension and OPEB plan. So we could achieve full funding before 2032. The contribution amount as listed on this slide are included in the budget, and they reflect the more aggressive contribution approach. And staff is evaluating the development of a permanent funding policy that will take us beyond 2032 for a future budget cycle. And we'll discuss that with the Finance Committee in the future. Here are some key budget assumptions. Both the budget and our long range financial planning assumes a 3% annual rate increase. They also include the updated costs for water purchases, chemicals and labor and benefits costs that are consistent with the labor contracts. SFPUC are raising their wholesale water rates by 16% next year, and then about 11% the year after. There's significant increase in chemical costs and we will update them based on the final bid amounts. We should get that in a few weeks. Labor and benefits costs include the cost of living adjustments that are consistent with labor contracts. And just to provide an update on the defined contribution retirement retired health benefit plan. Currently, there are 74 employees that are enrolled in this benefit plan. That's 30% of our budgeted full-time position. Here's just outline the key increases in operating expenses in the amended fiscal year 22-23 budget since budget adoption. There are increases in water purchases, chemicals, which is ongoing, and then services, various contracts throughout the district, additional costs related to negotiated labor contracts, expense projects increase, as well as an increase in rebates. So this slide summarized the financial result and changes since budget adoption. I'll just cover these points here on this slide. So this is a summary showing the actual financial results of the last 2 fiscal years. So we have 2 actuals for the 2 years. The estimated actuals for the current fiscal year compared to the adopted budget, and the amended fiscal year 22-23 compared to the originally adopted budget. This is for the general fund. Fiscal year 21-22 estimated actuals beginning balance of $123.9 million is $1.8 million higher compared to the adopted budget, $122.1 million. The ending or the estimated ending balance for the current fiscal year increased by $6 million compared to the adopted budget. And that's an increase of $8 million compared to the fiscal year 2021 actuals. And finally, the estimated ending balance for the fiscal year 22-23 amended budget at $122.6 million. Decreased by $5.6 million compared to the originally adopted budget. So overall, general fund ending balance increased by $5.6 million for the various reasons I just described. Changes in the general fund ending balances are significantly affected by adding $10 million of bond proceeds that due to the refunding in the current year, and removing the $19.5 million loan anticipated for the AMI program, the SRF loan. Okay, now just wanted to share an update on the indicators that the board had seen before. We updated this through March of 22. This is just showing the economic rebound from about a year ago. As illustrated in the unemployment number, CPI and GDP data. So there's a rebound. However, there's significant headwinds. As you all know, the consumer price index increased 8.5%. Year ended March 2022. Quarterly GDP fell 1.4%. Just want to touch on, skip over to the past due balances that's more affecting the district. It had declined from the peak of $1.9 million in September 2021. And the March 2022 showing the past due balance of $1.3 million. And then in fact, in April, it's down to $1.1 million. So if we look at the average past due balances for the last 12 months, it's $1.5 million.
Can I ask on the past due balances? We do not accumulate them. Once we turn it over to a collection agency, we zero it out. So that is really a current past due balance, not an accumulated past due balance.
The current, yes, that is correct. It is the current past due balance is a 1.3, for example, as of March, of $1.3 million.
So that'd be this year, and if we were to put it on the past due bills on the property tax bill, that would zero out each year and every year.
So maybe I can take that one. So that's the past due balance on current active customer accounts is 1.3 million. If in the future the board did elect to use the property tax roll, we would be eligible, consistent with state law, to place past due balances that are more than 60 days past due on the tax roll. So you can't put every past due dollar on the tax roll. It's only the balances that are more than 60 days past due. That would represent, approximately half to 2/3, I think, of this past due balance.
Okay, about $1 million then.
Yeah, and it is, we did resume collections activities earlier this spring. Mr. Allen referenced that in April, it dropped to about 1.1 million. That's the result of us getting to certain points in those processes where customers are now kind of obligated to come in and stick with the payment arrangement to avoid some of those consequences.
Our experience is for that $1.some million, so we will only recover 20% of it. Should we turn it over to a collection agency, or if we, on property tax, we'd almost get 100%. So it's running about $1 million.
Well, I think we're at pretty low risk of losing these past due balances, because again, these are active accounts. And so now that we've reinstated our normal collections activities, historically, when we put the door hangers out, that results in customers coming in, entering into payment plans and getting current on their bills. So we would only refer an amount to the collections agency if the customer closes their account and doesn't pay their final bill. So I don't think we can quite compare these numbers here with the amounts that might get referred to a collection agency.
We can get into the cost of putting a doorknob hanger on. So, and how much we reverse. So great. No, thank you. It's helpful in the context here. It's about $1 million. So thank you.
Thank you. So this graphic illustrates the economic recovery I mentioned earlier since the pandemic. This shows the data through January. But as we know, there is uncertainty ahead of us. There's high inflation, higher interest rate, supply chains delay and disruption, and uncertainty for the investment. So any of those things could impact the district. This graph illustrates our water consumption for multiple years. The consumption of interest is the fiscal year 21-22, or the current fiscal year, represented by the dash, the green dash line. It's overall it's trending below, lagging below the other year's consumption. The year-to-date consumption as of April 30th is down 6% compared to prior year to date. And that concludes this part of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer. I'll pause here and I would answer any additional questions you may have before I turn it over.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the board?
Actually, I need a clarification. So for the last slide, Mr. Huang, it's actually our water consumption rate for this year is higher than the past year, right?
The margin April is higher. So we did not get the conservation that we hope to get, but we're still looking at the data. We're still monitoring that to the end of the fiscal year. So it does show that the margin April consumption is higher.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other?
No, I will just state that it's an excellent presentation. There's so much material here to digest. I need to spend more time with it at home. And I'm hopeful that we will have a second workshop. Because but otherwise, it's excellent work on the part of all the teams that were involved in putting this together.
All right, thank you. And I would note that the consumption to date really will be reflected for the full year because of the billing and the time it takes to bill and collect the money. So this year's pretty much in the can. We're going in now, we're starting in on next year's finances. Okay, thank you.
So I have one comment to make before I leave. We had our finance committee meeting yesterday, so you heard my comments there. On our reserves that we have right now, with board and committee input, we are now going to break out capital. What did you call it in the?
Capital Project Sinking Fund?
Right, but the sinking fund for capital projects. So that will no longer be as part of the emergency reserve that we have. And I'm very delighted that we're taking that step because I thought this should have been done a long time ago. But my big worry is, which I've expressed in previous meetings in previous years, is that we have projects that we are planning on doing that never get done during the cycle that we were planning for. So we keep building up these extraordinary funds. And I think we're up to $61 million right now of unexpended money. And this doesn't serve our ratepayers well. Either we need to forecast our capability to get the work done over a longer period of time, so that, you know, a lot of these capital projects feed back into our rate process and rate increases for people. And if the money just sits in the bank earning interest, I don't think we really are doing, serving the public well. So here we are again with a major deficit this year. There are certain reasons why the solar projects have not moved forward. Those are federal government issues. But like Driscoll Road, you know, I'm concerned that that project hasn't gotten underway, and that's a major capital project. We have others that are on the CIP list. So it's just something to think about. And, you know, there are ratepayers that might accuse us of being a little bit excessive in terms of taking in money and then not deploying it. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we have any other comments from members of the board? Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you. We're just getting started. So I will turn this over to Mr. Martin Coran, our Senior Financial Analyst, to go over the next part of the presentation. We'll dive in, look at more detail of our amended budget.
Thank you.
So I will leave the meeting here.
And this may be a time to ask if the members of the public have any questions about what has been presented
We
so far as
can
well.
reopen and see if there's anyone from the public. We've been looking for a hand to go up, but none has shown on your screen, which is one way to notify us if you wish to speak or address the board. But there being none, let us continue the meeting. And Director Sethy has with the record show, Director Sethy is leaving to attend another ACWD responsibility with the GIS.
Yeah. But before I leave, I would like to say welcome back to Mr. and Mrs. DeJoe, who I have not seen in a board meeting in quite some time. And so thank you for joining in tonight.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I thank you, Mr. Allen, for the introduction. Good afternoon, members of the board and staff. As Mr. Allen described already, every finance slide will have the same format showing 2 years of prior year actuals, adopted budget for this year versus the estimated budget, and then the adopted budget versus the proposed amended budget. So total revenues, overall fiscal year 21-22, the revenues are expected to come in approximately 3% below budget. This is mostly due to the forecast demands being lower than anticipated as we prepared the budget last year, as well as delays in expected grant reimbursements due to CIP timing. For the proposed amended budget fiscal year 22-23, total revenues are expected to increase compared to the estimated actual for this year, as grant revenues that were delayed will come in over the budget period. It is important to note, even with a full year of stage rate revenue in the amended budget for 22-23, water revenues are expected to be approximately $1 million less compared to the original adopted fiscal year 22-23 budget. This next slide details the four major components of the water revenues that were summarized on the previous slide. I just want to bring your attention to the water shortage emergency stage rates line that is new. That makes up 2% of total water revenues, and it became effective March 1st as you, the board, declared the stage 2 water shortage emergency. As a result, and including additional customer conservation, the total amended budget for fiscal 22-23, our water revenues are estimated to be $1 million less than the original adopted budget. And you can see that clearly on the screen. This is simply the graphic version of the previous table. So it illustrates overall expected revenue changes over the budget period based on the most recent assumptions we already discussed. It's just a lot easier to see the trends in the pretty colorful picture. The staff has worked very hard to secure the grants that you see up on the screen, bringing the 4-year total to $32.1 million. There is an additional $500,000 from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for AMI, which doesn't appear on this slide because it is expected in fiscal year 23-24, so the following year's budget. Just a little background, a reminder, the grants management team, they meet monthly to discuss and identify future opportunities to pursue from a variety of sources. And speaking of, staff is currently working on the opportunities highlighted on the screen. Proposition 1 funds, FEMA grants, potential federal infrastructure funding, additional funding for PFAS, as well as significant infrastructure funding for main renewal program. And as you see on the screen, this is really just a detailed breakdown of all of the grants expected over the budget timeframe, including 2 years of actuals that the district has received. So overall, total expenses for all funds are estimated to be $10 million below budget this year, the amended budget versus the adopted budget, or estimated actuals. And that's mostly as a result of shifted capital projects. For next year's budget, the 22-23 amended, the operating budget changes were already discussed by Mr. Elm. The increase in water purchases, increase in chemical costs, and so forth. And that's what it looks like as a bar chart, right? You can see the trend, basically. The estimated actual is below, and then the amended budget is projected to be above the original adopted budget for 22-23 based on the expense increases we discussed. So above are the actual and estimated cash balances for all funds for the beginning and ending of each fiscal year. Since last year, fiscal year 2021 ended better than originally estimated, this fiscal year started off on better footing. So taking into account the revenues and expenses already discussed, we expect to finish fiscal year 21-22 $11.6 million better than the adopted budget projected at this time last year. The ending balance in the amended fiscal 22-23 is projected to be, if you compare it to the estimated actual for this year, it looks like a big drop, $13.3 million between the two. That's mostly as a result of the district not moving forward with the SRF loan for AMI. Next up are debt reserves and debt indicators. This slide includes an update to the reserve policy, which Director Sethy alluded to in the previous part of the presentation. And this was reviewed with Finance Committee yesterday. And it will be included with the budget for your consideration in June. The main takeaway from this slide is simply to say the reserves meet or exceed all of the established targets. So we're in good shape. Next up, we have a more detailed breakdown of our operations and maintenance expenses. These costs are highly dependent on water purchases, power, and chemicals, which can fluctuate widely from year to year. And we'll get into those details a little later, but please notice that the fiscal year 21-22 estimated actual is trending lower due to lower demands. However, we are expecting cost increases across all categories next year. So this is just a picture that illustrates what we just talked about. You can see the slight savings this year and then the cost increases in the amended budget for 22-23. Next up are administrative and general expenses. These include district-wide benefits for all employees and are expected to come in below budget this year and then increase in the fiscal year 22-23 amended budget. For this year, estimated savings in pension and medical premiums are mainly the result of actual staffing being below budgeted staffing. There are increases in the proposed amended budget based on full staffing, continued aggressive pension and OPEB funding, and medical cost inflators identified in the most recent actuarial reports. So this just illustrates what we just talked about. So the next two charts illustrate the percentage breakdown of total general fund labor cost by cost center, including capital projects, customer jobs, and debt service. This chart shows that the total general fund estimated actual for this fiscal year, $144.5 million. 38% of that total is labor. The labor is the shaded portion of the pie of those different colors. Shaded blue versus the brighter blue, for instance. And for next year, this just illustrates the labor portion is 37% of the general fund amended budget. The labor expenses by cost center by fiscal year is up next. The estimated actual includes implementation of salary survey results. Also, the amended budget year is based on full staffing and includes a built-in 3% vacancy savings rate because we don't always have full staffing. The employee benefits are summarized above. The main takeaway here is that the annual pension and OPEB costs are consistent with the board's actions to aggressively fund the associated unfunded liabilities. This leads to improved actuarial performance and a quicker payoff. Full-time equivalent positions, full-time positions, vacancies, and retirements are up on the screen now since fiscal year 2015. In that year, the district had 238 positions. It dropped down to 230 and is now at 244, 10 of which are defined term. We have 17 vacancies so far this year, which is above average. We usually have about 13 and a half. So we're at 17 and we've had 4 retirements so far. Purchased water, 2 main points for this one. The district is experiencing higher costs this year due to a combination of the dry year conditions, production constraints related to PFAS at the blender, and filter media change out at treatment plant 2. In comparison to the current year estimated actual, we are expecting slightly lower costs next year due to lower demands, despite San Francisco water cost increases and production constraints. For power, although PG&E rates increased this fiscal year, the extended shutdown and low rate operation of the desalination plant and the wells last fall contributed to lower than normal power costs for the first half of the fiscal year. Next year's power budget is remaining unchanged since likely energy rate increases may be canceled out by lower drought demands. So chemicals, as we know, chemicals are required to treat raw water to drinking standards. The water quality this year has been problematic with the dry year, so chemical use has been higher than in normal years. Next year, Many water treatment chemicals have experienced sharp pricing increases due to market conditions and supply chain disruptions. Just for example, ferric chloride increased 48% in price, sodium hydroxide 87%, sodium hypochlorite increased 103%. We're seeing some really major increases. And just a reminder, the district participates in a regional consortium to ensure the best possible pricing for the chemicals. We're not alone in this either. And debt service. This slide shows the district's debt service and outstanding debt. This is according to official debt service schedules, and it includes the recent 2022 refunding bonds, which are inclusive of $10 million of new money. The SRF loan has been removed, and therefore we actually have a debt service savings next year because we have $19.5 million less debt to pay off. And I will pause here if anyone has any questions.
Do we have any questions from the board?
I actually have a question on one of the previous slides. And actually there's a, I guess, an overall philosophical question.
Could you repeat the question, please? It's hard to hear.
Okay, sorry about that. So I guess a lot of these are based on a 15% conservation target, right? But in reality, our customers are not saving money. So in theory, we're taking in a lot more cash than expected. So is that considered in the proposed budget, in the proposed amended budget? I guess that's a way to put it.
Right, the revenues are based on the 15% conservation factor.
Okay, so in theory, it's potentially possible we would have more income than expected if our customers do not hit the 15% conservation target.
That is correct, but we would also have to purchase additional water in order to meet that demand.
Okay, so there will be an offset. All right, that's actually really good to know. And actually back on slide 48. So you need to help educate me a little bit on that slide. So this is in regard to the rate stabilization fund. So I noticed that for 2021 actual, we ended up with what, 34, I think this is in millions, and we were targeting 7.5 mil. But then the 21-22 adopted budget has 8, and we have an estimated actual about 6.4. So what happened to the extra 25 some odd $million?
Right, so it's a very good question. As Director Sethy and Directors Weed both sit on the Finance Committee, and they were alluding to earlier, is we're updating the reserve fund policy, and it includes the capital project sinking fund. And in prior years, the policy was any additional money left over that's from funding the other reserves was put into the rate stabilization fund. So the initial target for fiscal year 1920 was 6,199,000. And we had, well, that's not a good example, the 60/50. Let me go back to, sorry, 2021, right? $7.5 million rate stabilization was the target, and we had an actual of 34.2, right, which is your point. So that's basically, we put all additional reserves into the rate stabilization fund because we didn't have another place to put them.
So are we moving it somewhere else? Because now for 21-22, your estimated actual is back down to $6 million.
Yes, exactly. So if you'll notice, the capital sinking fund for fiscal year 21-22 is $65.1 million. And we are creating an operations contingency fund as well for any remaining reserves. So that's an additional $6 million. So the operations contingency fund is money set aside after, it's all the remaining funds after all the other reserves have been funded.
I see. So instead of every extras, I'll call it extras, go to the rate stabilization fund, the rate stabilization fund would just remain at the target level, and any excess go to either the sinking fund or the operational contingency fund. Is that what it is?
Correct, except
Okay.
the sinking fund has a specific, basis. It's taking the, oh goodness.
It's basically in shorthand, the capital project sinking fund says we intend to cash fund our capital program. And we know in future years, we are planning greater expenditures than can be funded with the revenue within that year. So we need to have money set aside ahead of time to be able to fund that. And so basically what we saw from fiscal year ending 21 to the current fiscal year is the amount of money that we needed to set aside for capital projects went up. You'll see as we get into the CIP discussion, some pretty big cost increases within the next 5 years for capital projects. And that's the biggest thing that's happening here. And then kind of a secondary factor is, based on discussions with the finance committee, we want to stop showing reserves above the policy target just within the rate stabilization, and instead view the rate stabilization as more for normal year-to-year fluctuations. And unfortunately, we're kind of showing this now, and you'll get more details on that at the regular June meeting when the reserve policy is presented to the full board.
Okay, no, I just want to know what happened to the money, and I will tell you that off the back of my head saying, hey, that's a lot of money. Maybe we'll put it towards AMI. But okay, maybe not.
Yeah, I think when we get through the CIP section, you'll see what's coming up, and there are some very expensive projects programmed for the next few years.
Well, thanks for depressing me. Thank you for the
All right, thank you.
explanation.
Other members of the board have a question? And I noted in the workshop that commended staff for not using the terminology of the city of Fremont, which had an undefined rainy day reserve. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I will turn it over to our project engineering manager, Reka Ipagunta, to take you through the capital improvement program.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coran. Good afternoon, members of the board and staff and members of the public. I'll be presenting the capital improvement program. I want to just emphasize that this is an effort from many across the district, and many thanks to everyone who contributed to this program. So before diving into the, sorry. Are you? Excuse me, I'm just trying to get back to the slides. Okay, so before I dive into the details of the capital improvement program and enumerate the budgets, just for your visual pleasure, I put some pictures here. So these are the projects that were completed in the last 12 months. The top two pictures on the left-hand side, those are the Valsitos improvement project pictures. One is before and one is after construction. And then we also have a booster station upgrade project on the right-hand side and the Avalon tank safety improvement project. We also have a main renewal program. This is something that was constructed in City of Newark. Okay, so the agenda for today, the first few slides, I will quickly touch on the CIP framework. The board has seen this information several times. And then in the later part of the presentation, I'll focus on the key changes to the CIP and also some highlights of the proposal. And then conclude with focus on our near-term 2-year budgets. So CIP is a financial representation of our capital improvement program. And we use our CIP database, which is a tool that we have built in-house by staff for updating our CIP program. And we also use a financial planning model to understand the constraints, fiscal constraints of the budget. So the board has seen this slide several times. It's our comprehensive CIP plan. But just for the benefit of the public, I'll quickly go over this. Projects are prioritized for strategic spending while making improvements to our capital infrastructure plan. And our CIP incorporates projects and programs to meet our district strategic plan and also our integrated resources plan. CIP also incorporates our engineering report recommendation that prioritizes projects for the next 10 years. And we also add the capital expenditures related to operational improvements to meet regulatory requirements and other routine replacements. And we also add findings from facility assessments and other studies. And the proposal that we are going to present today for the CIP, it has been validated using our financial planning model. And the CIP is within the financial policy guidelines. We have used the 3-year budget to be within $150 million. So that's the guideline that we have used when we are preparing the updates. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me while I go through this, and I'll also try to pause when it's a meaningful transition. Okay, so before I dive into the budget details in the next few slides, let me provide some context. So we have invested about $53 million in the last fiscal year as part of the capital program. We have surpassed the investment goals for 2021. And for this budget update, we have added some new contingency projects to the CIP. And we also reevaluated the investments, priorities, and strategies. So before I talk about some of the revisions we have made to the program, I wanted to just emphasize that there are a lot of uncertainties that we have been observing because of inflation and supply chain disruptions and also labor shortages. So in order to address and plan for these uncertainties, we are taking a strategic approach. So what we are trying to do here is we have revised the capital project estimates for the near-term construction projects to reflect the current market conditions. And for the out-year projects, we have not updated for inflation. And also, we haven't made any changes to our resource requirements as part of the mid-cycle update. This would be captured as part of the 2-year budget updates. Okay, so this table provides our actual investments for the last 2 fiscal years and also our revised budget estimates for the next 2 fiscal years. Over the last 2 years, our actual investments increased from $33 million to $53 million, which is about 60% increase in the capital investments. And in the next 2 years, the capital investments for the program are estimated to continue to be aggressive with an average $50 million per year. Okay, so this is our CIP overview for the 25-year, starting with the 25-year plan, and then I've shown it at a near-term, mid-term, and a long-term program. Overall, as I mentioned, the program budgets haven't changed significantly. This is because for the same reason, we kept the baseline estimates as is. We have not applied the current inflation to the entire CIP plan. So the increase is insignificant in this case. However, our 2-year and 10-year plan have changed. The budgets were reduced in the 2-year plan, but it's just a shift in the budget. So whatever was reduced in the 2-year are reflected in the 10-year budget. So this is just a representation of the highlights to the changes we have made to the large programs in the CIP over the 25-year plan. As you can see, the plan increased by 1.4%, about $20 million, and about $10 to $11 million is contributed by our main renewal program and seismic improvement projects. And the programs that are represented in green are indicating increase, and the programs represented in purple are indicating reduction in the overall program budget, and the customer jobs remain same. So the reason for main renewal and seismic improvement project increase is again going back to the current inflation. So we do have several projects planned under these two programs in the near term. So we have added close to 8% inflation and additional contingency to those projects. Fish passage, I think we have seen $1 million increase, but that's just the accounting variation. It is the difference between the time the budget spent versus the invoicing. So it's just a correction to the accounting. So in addition to that, on the AMI project, the advanced metering infrastructure, we have added about $2 million as a potential change order for complying with federal prevailing wage. We'll be removing those $2 million when we bring this budget back to the board in June. And that is related to SRF funding, and the prevailing wages are not feasible for the project to be successful.
Are you open to questions in this, as the slide goes on? Do you want us to wait until?
Yeah,
you
this
complete?
would be a good time to pause. Please go ahead with your questions.
All right, first of all, is there anyone that has a question on the capital? The question I have, comment was made that Los Vaqueros had a $98 million line item in our capital improvement budget. Does that still remain?
That still remain, and we made some adjustments to the 2-year budget cycle based on the budgets that we have seen with the JPA. So those adjustments were only made to the 2-year budgets, but the rest of the program is still the same. Okay. And these are just our estimates for ACWD contribution to the JPA.
And on the AMI, that has a higher cost for the smaller meters because we're replacing the meters as opposed to making a modification to the existing meters?
The cost has not really changed since the last budget adoption. The only reason, if I understood your question, the only reason we have the $2 million change in the budget is for a federal prevailing wage. We were anticipating potential SRF funding. So to comply with the federal prevailing wage, we added 2 million, but we'll be removing that when we bring the budget back to the board for recommendation in June.
Okay. My concern at the time was, particularly since we're putting in the ultrasonic, which will read another 5% on the water consumption, but even the capital cost was approaching $1,000 per customer for the new meter. So thank you.
And I also want to note that this AMI line item includes a future AMI replacement project based on the life cycle. And again, this is just a placeholder at this point. When we get closer based on the performance of the ultrasonic meters and the remaining useful life, we will have to readjust the next program. But for now, we are just capturing it on our 25-year program to make sure we are planning for the next round.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd invite questions at any time. And for our members of the public in attendance, feel free just to raise your hand in the Zoom app if you ever have any question as we go. And certainly we'll be pausing along the way too, that we'd be happy to take any questions or comments from you as well.
There are no other questions. I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so in the next few slides, I will focus on the changes that we have made during the mid-cycle budget update. So we have added some new projects, as I mentioned earlier. These are the key projects that we have added to the CIP during this cycle. Again, some of these are placeholders, and the implementation of these projects is dependent on several factors such as permitting and other things that are going on. Most of these are assessment type of projects. For example, Vineyard Heights Tank Site Stability Project. It is something staff has observed that there is ground movement near this tank, near the foundation and also on the hillside, to evaluate and come up with a corrective action. We have added a project to do a thorough review of that tank site, what appears to be a site stability issue at this point. And similarly, we have added a new project for concrete assessment for our treatment plant 2. And vehicle capital is another new item we have added. Likely, this is something that we would be moving to the operating budget when we bring the budget back to the board again in June. And outfall is something that we have observed that the outfall is in distress. So we'll be looking at evaluating the existing outfall and making corrective action to that. And the last one is our long-term supply reliability project. This is a secondary well to mitigate the impacts of PFAS. This is currently in evaluation. It's just a placeholder project at this time.
So Ms. Epagunda, I do have a question regarding the Vineyard Heights tank site stability project. I thought we already have a hill stability project going, right? I remember touring it. So is this in addition to that? Do we need to do additional work?
So back in 2009, we have done some seismic improvements to the site, and that project has been completed. So this is a new project. We've been making some field observations. So we don't really have a project focusing on evaluating the condition and then making some assessments. So that's something that we would like to do as part of this project. Currently, we don't have any other project that is underway.
Okay, so this is this more related to the hillside or is this related to the foundation?
This appears to be some ground settlement at the foundation,
Okay.
and it's also tied to the hillside. So that's why we want to do some additional surveys
Okay.
and get geotechnical engineer on board to understand what is causing this deformation.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? The question I have, Director Sethy is not with us, and he sits on the Finance Committee for the Delta Conveyance. But we've just authorized a multi-million-dollar payment toward Delta Conveyance. Should we consider reflecting our contributions toward that now $170 million portion of, assuming they can keep it at 16 billion, our share somewhere in the area of $180 million. Should that be reflected in our CIP, particularly for making payments toward it until the state issues bonds?
It's currently not, I believe it's not included in the CIP. It's probably added to the operating budget at this time. I'm looking up to
Yeah,
Mr.
so
Wonderlich.
the payments that we make to the state for participation in the state water project are all considered an operating expense to the district. And so those payments that you mentioned are reflected in the operating budget totals that were covered this evening. And future payments for our share of the Delta Conveyance project are reflected in our financial planning model.
But not shown in our CIP.
Correct. They're not shown in the CIP. They're not considered capital expenditures to the district. They're considering an operating expense to the district.
All right, thank you.
Because we do not take ownership of any asset.
All right. And that'll also apply when we get around to trying to upgrade South Bay Aqueduct and along those same lines, would that also apply toward the Los Vaqueros, or are we taking an ownership interest in Los Vaqueros?
So currently, the Los Vaqueros project is shown as an extraordinary expense. And I would say it's too early within that project to understand what sort of ownership of different facilities the JPA may take itself, and whether we as a member agency of the JPA would be able to record an asset to the district. So for now, we record those as extraordinary expense. And then through that process, through the accounting process, we will eventually make a determination on whether to capitalize those expenses or not.
Okay, and that would, and the concept is still to have both East Bay Mud and Contra Costa to have veto authority over any actions that happen in the utilization of those facilities.
Well, their authorities pertain solely to their existing assets. So they would not have veto authority over utilization of newly constructed facilities by the JPA.
That's fascinating because okay, so that opens up the possibility of water going to Southern California, going south, which they've had a moral objection to. That's
Well,
interesting.
I don't believe there's an ability to participate in the project without also making use of some of their existing assets.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in the next couple of slides, just going to focus on the fiscal year changes, starting with fiscal year 2021, which is the current fiscal year. We made some reductions to the budget. The adopted budget was 52, and then the proposed budget is $44 million. And some of those are reductions. For example, watershed preservation and protection project, we had accounted for $5 million in the CIP, and that was related to N3 Ranch. Now we have removed that line item from the CIP, so that's a reduction of $5 million. And we also have made some additional adjustments to Las Vegas Reservoir Expansion Project, as I mentioned before, just for the 2-year cycle. We reduced the budget by $1.6 million. And we made adjustments to AMI project. This is based on the production schedule. Whatever is reduced here doesn't mean it disappears. It's actually added to the next fiscal year or the following fiscal year. These are just shifts in budgets. And Avalon tank slope stabilization, because of the construction timing, the project is shifted to the following fiscal year. That's something that we have recently awarded the contract and going into construction.
Could I ask, what is the watershed preservation and protection?
So that was intended for N3 cattle ranch. At the time, there was some effort going on in the purchase of N3 ranch.
I'm sorry, with which?
The N3 Ranch.
Oh, N3
property.
Ranch.
Yeah, that we put that $5 million potential expenditure in the CIP at that time.
So we're suggesting that's being removed now?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then some additional adjustments to our routine replacements. The ones that I'm showing in green are the additions to the program for this fiscal year. Main renewal program, we have added some dollars for completing some of the small diameter segments. And Valsitos channel improvements. This is the project that was originally planned for next fiscal year. And we were able to accelerate the project construction, and the project has been completed. So there is a shift of addition of $2 million, but actually those were shifted from the next fiscal year, which you'll see in the next slide.
You know, what I find interesting is we have, as I understand, the discussions were that we would fully reimburse Contra Costa for the cost of their watershed and the expenses in building the current facilities in LV 1 and 2, because we're 40% is adjusted for inflation. So 40% of a triple value is 120%. So we may still be putting watershed under that scenario. We would be purchasing watershed in Contra Costa, reimbursing them for their expenses for that watershed. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes, in the next slide, some of the key changes made to the coming fiscal year. We have reduced budget for groundwater reclamation project. This includes acquisition of 3 properties for replacing desal out wells. This is a long-term planning project. Again, the dollars have been shifted to the next year because of the delay in finding appropriate land for this project. And then Las Vegas, something that I have already mentioned. Valsitos channel improvements, again, the project was accelerated, so we have removed the budget from next fiscal year. Service line emergency replacements, those are based on the actual spent over the last few years, so we made adjustment to that. And then for, in terms of additions to the 2023 budget, 22-23, sorry, we have added $4 million for main renewal program. Again, this is a shift in the project planning for Driscoll project. There have been some issues going on that we were trying to resolve with City of Fremont, and we just have come to an agreement with City of Fremont, so the project will be moving forward into construction. So we have added inflation. The project costs have significantly gone up, so that includes the Driscoll and other main renewal projects.
Thank you. One more comment on the PFAS treatment. Certainly it's coming down as a requirement. But one of the concerns I would ask that you keep a close eye on is the suggestion that PFAS be treated as a hazardous waste when they get into concentration, and the treatment process will result in a concentrated brine, and what the cost might be to have to deal with that brine. And I don't believe anyone has put that into their calculations today.
That is excellent question. That is something that the whole industry is watching at this time, because PFAS, once it's categorized as hazardous waste. One good thing about the treatment technologies that we are looking at is we'll not have to backwash, where we'll be generating liquid hazardous waste that we will be owning the waste at that point. In this case, we'll be completely replacing the media. So the media will be disposed of, and the vendor who supply the media will be responsible for disposing of the hazardous waste. And it would be part of the media's purchase requirements.
And that currently hazardous waste are trucked to a hazardous waste site somewhere in the state. So it's an extraordinary expense.
That is correct. Yes.
All right, thank you. It will make the recycling water process all the more difficult. So it's been noted that the traditional wastewater treatment process creates PFAS. Thank you.
So I have a few more here in terms of additions to the program. One is Kirtner Booster Station, as you have seen a couple of hours ago, that we have added the budget. The bids came out to be higher than our engineer's estimate on this job. So we have added additional budget that would be necessary to complete the project. So that's again, going back to making adjustments to the current economic conditions. And Avalon tank is just a shift from last year to this fiscal year. Okay, so the next few slides, I'll be focusing on the 25-year long-term plan. Although the changes were minimal, this just gives a comparison of where the budget adjustments have been made. Over the period of 25 years, our estimated budget is $1.4 billion. In the near term, when I say near term, it's about 5 years starting from the current fiscal year. We're expecting about $57 million per year investment on average. And the out-year focus is currently at $45 million, and that's going to change depending on the priorities of the district. And then I also want to highlight some of the out-year exceptions. In 3031, we have Mission San Jose Water Treatment Plant recommissioning project. So that adds up to about $24 million spread over multiple years again. And then we also have a placeholder project for indirect portable reuse water reclamation facility. That's a $125 million project that we have budgeted. And again, it's an extraordinary expense at this point. And we do have our second round of AMI replacement in the budget. That's, as you can see, that we have shifted that from the earlier 41, 42, 42, 43 to the later years in the CIP. And again, that's a placeholder that might likely be shifting out into the next 25-year plan. So the next chart is, again, our 25 representation of our 25-year CIP with respect to our district's strategic plan. 93% of our CIP supports the district's strategic goals. One is main focus on aging infrastructure, addressing seismic vulnerabilities and regulatory compliance, which is our goal one, and also enhancing our sustainability of our water supply resources. 20% of our budget is supporting our water supply strategic objective. So 7% of the capital is coming from other initiatives and customer jobs, which will not impact the rates. So this is another way of representing our capital improvement program. This is again our 25-year program. As you can see, 72% of our CIP will improve reliability, which is system reliability, production, operational sustainability, and seismic reliability. And then we have 22% of our budget allocated for water supply, water quality, and environmental enhancements. The fish passage projects are part of environmental enhancements, and that is actually shrinking as we have passed that phase. And we have our customer jobs, 6% of the CIP will have no impact on rates. This is another 25-year CIP representation by funding source. It's about $990 million of the CIP is funded by our ratepayers. That's 71%. That includes both our capital project expenditures and also extraordinary expense. I will try to explain or differentiate the extraordinary capital and capital expenditures in a bit. We also have developer related charges that include our facility improvement fund, facilities renewal fund, and also customer jobs. So 29% of our CIP is funded by development related charges, which doesn't impact our ratepayers. So just to differentiate what is capital, how do we differentiate capital expenditure versus extraordinary expenditure? To simplify this, when a project is complete, if the project results in addition of an asset or improvement to an existing asset or replacing an existing asset, then it's a true capital project. So our accounting principles are in line with if a capital asset has useful life extending beyond 1 year and the cost of each unit is more than $5,000, it is qualified as a capital project expenditure. And extraordinary projects are one-time or unusual expenditures that may lead to a capital project, but immediately they will not result in an asset. Some examples of extraordinary expense projects are our feasibility studies and optimization studies, and also some emergency repairs related to unplanned events. So here is a listing of all the extraordinary expense capital that we have in our proposal. Overall, this adds up to about $250,000 of our entire CIP, which is not a major portion in that case. So just to identify a few, we have some IT projects. These are not very routine upgrades related to the IT infrastructure. And we also have some projects related to our purified water feasibility evaluation. Those are study or feasibility study projects. We also have a placeholder for $135 million for water reclamation. This is the indirect potable reuse project that we are planning at this point. So in the next few slides, I'll be moving on to the 10-year CIP. So starting with the 10-year CIP by program, about a quarter of the CIP in the next 10 years is allocated for main renewal projects, and then seismic improvements, AMI and fish passage adds up to another 25%. And the remaining budget is for other capital projects that includes our routine replacements, in-kind replacements to operate and maintain our system. We also have 8% from customer jobs. So some of the projects that make up our other capital category, Los Vaqueros, this is extraordinary expense project, but still part of our other capital. And as I mentioned, some of our routine replacement projects include pump replacements at our groundwater facilities, production well replacements, PLCs, programmable logic controllers, SCADA upgrades, and booster station upgrade projects. All these come under our other project category.
Excuse me, on that last chart, is that other capital in addition to the extraordinary projects?
No, this includes extraordinary projects.
Included in that.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
So this is again the program for the next 10 years, our planned expenditures by program. So in the current fiscal year, over the last 3 years, you may have noticed that majority of our expenditures were going towards passage projects. By 21-22, coming to a successful completion of the fish program. And then our major implementation phases are going to shift to advanced metering infrastructure projects and main renewal projects, and also will be focusing more on the seismic improvement projects, which includes our reservoir roof replacements. So here is a listing of a partial list of our CIP, the projects that contribute to more than $500,000 in the fiscal year for 21-22. As you can see, the $500,000 limit is only for that fiscal year, but the overall project expenditures could be different. So for the purpose of having a clear idea what the total project commitment is, we have identified the next column for the multi-year expenditures. So here is a listing of all the projects, more than $500,000 for fiscal year 22-23. And again, these include some large projects and programs that will continue in the construction phase or will be transitioning into construction phase in the next fiscal year. Some of those projects that will be going into construction, planning to go into construction include Kerner Booster Station project, which is $8 million overall expenditure anticipated on that. And AMR will ramp up to $14 million investment in the next fiscal year. And we do have other CIP projects identified, and Alameda Reservoir is also currently on the plan to go into construction in the next several months. With that, this concludes the CIP portion of the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, do we have questions from the board? The question I have, you have both CIP and then you have another $130 million in extraordinary projects. Do we have a chart that shows the cumulative of both the CIP and the extraordinary projects, particularly put on a timeline?
We have, yes. We do have a slide that has, for the 25-year program,
While Rekha is going to that slide, I want to point out to the board, there's an attachment, a handout that's included in the packet that shows the entire CIP plan.
Right. And
yeah, the CIP plan in the handouts includes all the projects, and the projects that are highlighted in red text, those are all extraordinary expense projects. Those are all included as part of our CIP.
It would be somewhere, I'm sure, it would be interesting to see when we add, the extraordinary projects are also such a major additional expenditure, almost equating that of our CIP, that basically doubles the impact. And it'd be interesting to see how that's played out over time.
Correct. That is actually included. The breakdown of extraordinary and capital expenditures are included in the CIP spreadsheet. I do have a copy here if you would like to take a look at
No,
it.
we have time. Thank you.
yeah, I wonder if our members of the public have any questions or comments to make. If you have any comments or questions, you can just unmute yourself. You can type them into the chat. We'd be happy to address them.
There's no, still as a mute is off. They're still muted
Yeah.
if they do. All right, There's no hand is up. Okay.
I don't see anything. No.
So without recognition, then let us move on if there is no public comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
So.
Okay, I'll continue with the presentation with this last part of the presentation. Previously, you've seen the 2-year budget. You've seen the 25-year CIP plan. So as part of sound financial planning, the district does look beyond the 2-year budget. So we utilize our financial planning model to help us with the forecast through the out year. For the mid-cycle budget, we're looking at a planning period through fiscal year 26, 27. So for this part, I will go over the assumptions that are built in the financial planning model, as well as looking at some of the key metrics that we showed to the board during the budget process. So we spoke about water demands earlier, so that's been updated. For the current 2-year budget, we assume a drought rebound over the next 3 years, and then the long-term demand going forward at 34.2 million gallons per day. Obviously, that may change, but that is our current assumption that's built into our long-term financial planning model. We've updated costs for the major categories. The financial planning model assumes all spending all of our capital improvement program. You saw $1.4 billion over the next 25 years. So that's built into the plan. Updated water purchase costs, as well as water supply initiative. We removed the $1 million related to the watershed preservation project. Employee salary and benefits were updated based on the current labor contracts. And then, as we talked about earlier, the financial planning model builds in the aggressive funding for pension and OPEB. So over the next however many years, we'll build that in. That could get us to full funding before June 2032, depending on, obviously, on the investment return in the future. The model includes the $10 million that we discussed many times here. This used to reimburse for past capital expenditures. 9 million of that is used to reimburse the Alvarado Niles project, phase 1. $1 million of it is used to reimburse the small diameter main renewal project. So that 10 million is already used to reimburse past capital project expenditures. So the district is no longer pursuing the state revolving fund loan. So we removed the $19.5 million associated with that. The long-term financial planning model assume $30 million in new debt issuance in fiscal year 24-25 to help fund capital improvement programs. There's a few reasons for that, as you saw earlier, and we'll show you the metric again. The CIP over the next 8-year period is adding $23 million in capital project that's funded by the general fund. So we assume the $30 million issuing to help pay for part of that. The projected general fund ending balances, this is a key metric for the district to look at when we, during budget adoption, we look at through the planning period. The low year ending balance was at $90 million. That's 21 million above the reserve target. With the amended budget, with everything included, the district financial in the low year is projected to end at $67.5 million, or just roughly less than $1 million above the reserve target. So all that I was just describing here is shows in the graphic the metric. The one above is the amended budget. Below is the adopted budget. As you can see, during the at budget adoption, at the end of the planning horizon, there's a higher ending balance above the reserve target. But for the amended budget, looking at fiscal year 26-27, the low year during this planning horizon is only 800,000 above the reserve target. So we are utilizing all the beginning ending balance. As you see there, fiscal year 20, the current fiscal year ending balance, it's about $71 million above the reserve. And every year, the ending balance, the cash balance is going to get used until we get to about 800,000 above. This is just to note that the district is intentionally conservative with financial planning. As you can see here, total, if you look at the total revenue and expenditures in our financial planning model from fiscal year 21-22 to fiscal year 26-27, that total about $900 million in revenue or expenditures. So if you assume, actual revenues would increase by 1%, for various reasons, or the expenditures is lowered by 1%, the general fund balance at the end of the planning period will be nearly $10 million higher than the current projection of $0.8 million. So you'll see the ending balance is more similar to what the adopted budget was, if those were to happen. Oops. This shows the debt coverage ratios. You can see very healthy debt coverage ratios. This plays into why the district is AAA rated, because we have a very high coverage ratios, as we looked at earlier compared to other agency. You see a drop in coverage ratios because of what we talked about, assuming issuing debt in the fiscal year 25. So that will drop us down to about 300%, which is still higher than the 200% target set by the board. So this next metric is just showing the comparison between operating revenues to operating expenses. So when we look at this, it helps us look at really just looking at the operating revenue, whether that's going to cover the operating expenses. Starting in the current or the budget year 22-23, the operating expenses are projected to exceed operating revenues. So what this means is that the district relies on non-operating revenues to cover all of our operating expenses or the entire operations. The district currently receive about $13 million in property tax revenues. That's considered as non-operating revenue, as well as over $3 million in interest income. So similarly, this is looking at just the rate and charge revenue versus revenue requirement. Again, what this show is that the rate revenue is sufficient to meet revenue required for most year, but it's not sufficient to meet the revenue requirement plus pay for the general fund funded CIP. So that's what this shows. It really helps us look at just break down revenue and compare it to different types of expenses. And here's a summary looking at over the through fiscal year 26-27. We talked about this. Apologize for the scale there. It's not, it has different scale. But as Ms. Gunther mentioned earlier, we're shifting, over the next 3 years, we're within the $150 million adopted budget, amended in the same amount. But then following year, some projects get shifted to the following year. And then you look at in the fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, significant increase when compared to adopted budget. So overall, over the planning horizon there, we're adding $23 million in expenditures for the general fund funded capital program. And this also shows by funding source. So we have the general fund, the PAYGO, that issuing in the pink color, the facility improvement fund, as well as the facility renewal fund. So various funding sources to help us fund our capital program. And that concludes this part of the presentation, and I'll pause here to see if you have any questions.
Do you have any questions from the board? Make one quick comment. There are a couple other factors which are not limiting to us, but I think would be helpful in someone seeing the bigger picture. Something called a GAN limit. We're well underneath that each year. We have a capacity of the district, which I believe is around 90 MGD. Our maximum demand is somewhere around 50 MGD. So we have extra capacity. Our water storage in our facilities for normal operations allows us, again, a reasonable reserve. And then we obviously have shown the debt coverage ratio and things of that nature, but those are other factors which would show that the district is in a solid position. And then when we put that in a document, when we go for bond ratings, et cetera, it strengthens our story.
Yes, we do have those documents available, specifically the GAN limit that will be included as part of the adopted budget packet in June. So you will see that.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other question, I'll turn this over to Mr. Wunderlich to speak about the next steps.
Maybe just a quick check to see if members of the public may want to comment. This is a good time. Don't see
Apparently we
anything.
don't have
Yeah, that's fine. So we can move
a
on.
hand going up, so let's then I'll move on. Thank you very much. Does that conclude the item 5.2?
Not quite. We're
Okay.
just about. So in terms of next steps, we did not in detail review the goals, but we did review the budget assumptions. We reviewed the operating budget and the CIP, as well as the financial planning model. So we did stop throughout to receive any board questions or input. We do have a few staff initiated changes that were referenced during the course of the presentation that will be prepared for adoption in June. I think there were, I did not hear, I think, a lot of changes requested from the board. So based on what I heard this evening, and again, if we actually skip to the next steps, I think we can probably forego the May 26th workshop. Director Sethy did need to leave early this evening, so I will reach out to him and offer a meeting with staff to cover any of the material that he missed today so that he can be caught up on everything when we come to budget adoption in June. And then after that, I'll go back a slide. We are planning rate setting workshops starting in July. And so we will begin that process by presenting updated financial metrics based on the actual results for the current fiscal year. Everything you saw this evening for the current fiscal year was an estimate based on a certain number of months of actual data and then estimates for the rest of the fiscal year. So we'll have the actual results as the launching point to begin that rates process. And so that's what we have coming up. So unless there are further questions or feedback on the budget, you will see this next in June at the regular board meeting for adoption, and we will not have the workshop next week.
Okay, well, thank you. Do there are comments to the board? No. I suggest that even though it would be helpful to have the broad picture of including the O&M expenditures in capitalized form that we're looking at with the Delta conveyance, it's almost $200 million. The Los Vaqueros, an extraordinary expenditure. And then we have our regular, the CIP. Just to put in context of what our major investments are going to be for running the district. We looked at it somewhat piecemeal, I think, to having that bigger picture to show what our total financial commitments are, which we'll pay for in different mechanisms, but they're quite significant. So,
yeah, so I'm looking at Mr. Coran and Mr. Alm, and asking them to consider that comment as we prepare the staff report for the budget for the June meeting to specifically identify some of those items.
Thank you. All right, if there's no other comment, that would conclude.
I just want to say thank you to staff. Great presentations, nice details in the handouts. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. It's a lot of work. Well done. So that concludes item 5.2. We next go to item 6, which is a general manager's report, if any.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to have a report today. However, I'll give a brief update because as you know, we're all wearing masks right now. And so that's a new protocol that we're under. We've had a number of positive cases. I think we're really seeing the effects of very high case rates outside of our walls, but our employees live outside our walls. But things continued to ratchet up. And so just as of today, we've notified staff that for those folks who are participating in our telework program, we're removing or suspending the mandatory in-office work part of that telework program for some period of time. Just to kind of let things cool down a little bit, not bring people together if not necessary, and so forth. So I just want to provide that quick update to the board. Lots of things changing pretty quickly in the world of COVID. Beyond that, I didn't have any further GM reports, and I'm kind of scanning staff and not seeing anything. So unless there's questions.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick question. So how is that impacting a customer's ability to come into the office to ask questions?
No impact whatsoever. We're still staffing our customer counters and phones and so forth. All that's the same. There's no change in protocol to customers coming into the lobby or anything like that. This is really an internal thing. So, but I just wanted to give the board a heads up. The parking lot won't be quite as full over the next couple of weeks.
All right, thank you.
Do we anticipate needing to move board meetings back to virtual only at some point, or what's the consideration?
Yeah, I'm hoping we don't have to do that. So, but everything this is uncharted territory, just like it's always been. So we will continue to keep the board apprised of where our heads are. I'm hoping we don't have to do that. There's no indication that there's any sort of workplace spread here. So I feel like we're safe here, but if anything changes, we'll advise the board.
Thank you. All right, if that completes general manager's report, move on to item 7, which is director's comments and/or agenda item requests.
I just want to quickly say that I had the pleasure of attending the City of Newark's, celebration for their new City Hall and Library. It was actually a great event. I had a chance to hang out with staff at our booth to talk about water conservation, and we got some really positive feedbacks from our customers in Newark. Great feedbacks about AMI. I actually have customers once again telling me they can't wait to get AMI, and we have really good response in terms of our water conservation kit. I believe we ran out actually, and we had to take down names and promise to send them back. Staff, as usual, did a great job. And on the side note, I had the pleasure of talking to Ms. Solito.
Oh,
She was actually at the ceremony, so it was actually really nice to see her.
All right, thank you.
I'm good tonight.
Okay. I'll just note that the other morning I was surprised to hear on the radio, KCBS, a radio advertisement chastising Bosca for its support of litigation on voluntary agreements. The organization is SF4water.org. And so it's gone from the SFPUC. Now Bosca is apparently taken on the ire of this committee, which may have whose motives are not clear to me.
Funny you should mention, I did hear the same advertisement. I think it's Druckmeyer or something, San Francisco for Water Now, regarding the projects, the San Joaquin River
The
They're
Water
not
Now
targeting
Alliance is a separate organization.
You're right, they're targeting Bosca now, which was fascinating to hear that.
Yeah. Dennis Herrera, General Manager of the SFPUC, wrote a letter several months ago noting that it was his feeling that the State Water Resources Control Board and including Mr. Crowfoot were attempting to take the senior water rights of Modesto Irrigation District, Turlock Irrigation District in San Francisco and use them to address issues of salinity in the Delta in lieu of the state and federal water rights, which are junior, and because the state and feds came to the game much later. So it was a ploy not for fish, but rather for the other losing battle of trying to save the Delta. So, thank you. There are no other items? We can,
No other items from staff.
we are adjourned.
All right, thanks very much. Night, everybody.